All right, well, welcome everyone who's joining us tonight for our virtual topics and cave rescue session. We are in May. We only have 2 sessions left tonight and then in 2 weeks. So thank you for everyone who's joined us for one or more of the sessions. They are being recorded and they are going to be up on the NSS YouTube channel. And so you can watch them or direct your friends who cannot come so that they can find out all this great information. While we have people speaking, please mute yourselves. And then if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll also open it up for discussion at the end of the talks. So our first speaker tonight is Casey England. And Casey has been involved with search and rescue for the past 19 years. Originally joining the Travis County Search and Rescue Team as a wilderness K-9 handler, where he now serves as the Chief of Operations. Additionally, Casey serves as a search team manager for the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Team of Texas Task Force 1. Casey was first introduced to cave search and rescue through an NCRC Orientation to Cave Rescue course in 2010. Since that time, he has completed the majority of NCRC course offerings and has become an NCRC instructor. Recently, he was appointed to the NCRC Educational Committee and also serves as a certification coordinator. Casey has a broad interest in all components of search and rescue, but a passion for search. Please help me to welcome Casey.
Well, thank you, Gretchen. I appreciate the introduction. And thank you to everyone that's here this evening. Obviously, from the poll that Gretchen posted earlier, which I absolutely love that, I'll admit I fell into that 74% with the majority of you. So clearly, I'm not talking to any of you in terms of getting lost, because we don't get lost. But all those other people who weren't here for the poll will be the ones helping to go look for them. So, but to kick that off, again, do want to thank you all for being here. Especially for taking your time out of your evening. Obviously, there's other things that you could be doing tonight, but you have a passion and a dedication, just like was mentioned to myself, for cave search and cave rescue. So thank you for that. As Gretchen mentioned earlier, if there's any comments, feel free at any time, add those directly into the chat. Gretchen, Sarah, if there's something relevant for right then, feel free to interrupt me at any point. You know, I think if I had my way, I'm sure if all of us had our way, we would be in person doing this. And so, but in light of that, feel free to jump in and we'll get through this. So to get things kicked off, cave search. Why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Now, first off, I would argue that pretty much everything we do with caving in one aspect or another has some element of search related thereto. Whether that be looking for a new cave entrance, whether it's pushing for a new cave lead, whether maybe we're on a rescue and we're just searching for that perfect anchor placement. Whatever it might be, there is some element of search that comes into many aspects of caving. Tonight, obviously, we're going to focus on the search side of search and rescue. But as the term says, search comes first. As the title of the presentation says, you can't find someone or you can't rescue them until you find them. So we'll focus on that portion tonight. I think many of us may get involved in rescue in one capacity or another because we want to be able to help. What you see on the news is the person performing that rescue. Looking for pictures for this presentation, it became very obvious that the rescue is the sexy part. There were not a whole lot of pictures that I found even in my own archives of a group of people searching through a cave passage. But there's a whole bunch of pictures of people carrying a litter or building a rigging system. But again, you can't rescue them until you find them. So as we mentioned, let's take a look at some of the aspects that do involve search. So many times we have what could be considered a traditional cave rescue, but even that could involve search. You may be familiar with the Ellison's Cave Rescue from May of 2013. If you're not, I would encourage you to look up and read the report. It's entitled A Complex Technical Rescue in a Deep Cave by Alan Padgett and Buddy Lane. And a link to that paper will be posted here in the chat. And also a little bit intimidating that the author of the report that I'm talking about is here tonight with us. So, Alan, hopefully I do a good job and you don't have to correct me at the end, but if so, feel free. But anyways, so that is a very interesting rescue overall, and again, would recommend you take the time to find, open, and read that report. We're not going to take the time to review the entire rescue. That would take all the time we have tonight and then frankly much more. But we'll focus on a few of the components that relate to search. So just to set our stage here, Ellison's Cave, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, it's located up in the northwest corner of Georgia, basically right in the heart of Tag. The cave itself crosses directly through Pigeon Mountain. It's bookmarked on either end, one side by the 586-foot deep Fantastic Pit, which incidentally is the largest underground pit in the continental United States, and then on the other end by the 440-foot deep Incredible Pit. So in our scenario, on Sunday, May the 26th, 2013, we had 8 experienced cavers begin a crossover trip through the cave. And this cave is unique in that you can start half the party on one side, half the party on the other side, leaving the ropes in place and cross over, passing each other in the middle, exiting out the other team's ropes. So that's what they had set up for. Shortly after the two groups, each of 4 people each, passed each other in the midpoint of the cave, one of the groups was negotiating down a steep kind of down climb, just using a hand line. Last person in the party, everyone else heard him fall and tumble and hit the bottom. The group immediately started calling out for him and were unable to get any sort of response. Looked around for a minute and could not immediately find him, couldn't figure out where he went, what happened, etc. So knowing they had a pretty significant emergency on their hand, one of the party ended up leaving and heading for the entrance. So that's right around 1600 or 4 p.m. So immediately that person leaves. The other 2 continue searching for their friend. The reporting party, the gentleman who left, when he did, realized he didn't even know at that point if his friend was alive or dead. Thankfully, shortly after he left, about 20 minutes or so, the others were able to locate their friend, found out that he had slid down a pretty steep scree slope and over about a 20-foot edge. When they found him, he was sitting on a small rock, and they immediately noticed he had a pretty significant head laceration, an obvious left leg femur fracture, and a whole host of other issues, as you might imagine from a 20-foot fall. He did report that he'd been unconscious for about 15 or 20 minutes, which is why he didn't respond initially. So as that group is trying to take care of their friend, they were able to slow some of the bleeding, but obviously he was in very bad shape. Our reporting party continues on towards the entrance, making it out of the cave at about 1800, calling 911 and activating the Walker County 911 service. By about 1832, some of the rescuers began arriving and start meeting up with a reporting party. So at this time, we have the reporting party who's traveled incredibly fast out of this very large cave, and he's only able to provide a vague description of where his friend was. And again, not even knowing if he's alive or dead at this point. So we can see here from the slide, Incident Command immediately established a list of priorities, a large list of issues that they were going to have to deal with. And you'll notice number 3 is, how do we find this patient in what's otherwise an obscure patient location? Basically, all that could be provided was he was off the main route somewhere near the middle of the cave. So here's a profile view of the cave. And to, again, paint that picture a little bit more, Ellison's Cave has over 10 miles worth of passage, just in the bottom of the cave alone, over 10 miles worth of passage that spread across 5 different levels. Again, reporting party is only able to report a vague description of where they're located. He had just scrambled incredibly fast, 2 hours out of this cave, and was way too fatigued to go back in and help lead the rescue team. The report itself, I want to take one quote from there. It states, "Rescuers not familiar with the exact passage could spend hours or days wandering about the bottom of the cave looking for the patient." Fortunately for our rescuers, they did have two people that were responding who were very familiar with this portion of the cave, to the point that they actually delayed dispatching the initial response team into the cave, waiting to get those two individuals there so they could hopefully lead the team directly to the patient location. In this case, that gamble paid off. The IRT team was able to go pretty much directly to the patient location with relatively little issue. But think with me for a moment, what if that had not worked? What if those two rescuers had not been available that day? What if no one was available that was familiar with that passage? Or even if they were available, what if they still hadn't been able to locate the patient? Again, as the report said, rescuers could have spent hours or even days wandering about the bottom of the cave looking for the patient. So while this may have come out as just a complex rescue, we can, I think, easily see how it verged on very quickly, very easily becoming a very complex search incident. So let's spend the next few minutes here this evening and talk about that cave search and the various roles and responsibilities we could each play in that scenario. But I suppose before we move on, everyone wants to know how this one worked out. So the rescuers were able to successfully locate the patient, and they did confirm he was alive, although in incredibly bad shape. Such bad shape that a blood transfusion was actually performed on the patient underground, which is just absolutely amazing to me. The rescuers were able to package and extricate the patient from the cave at 12:30. So that's about 18 and a half hours after the initial 911 call, or a little over 20 hours from the time of the accident. Then took the rescuers over 6 hours to get all of the rescuers, gear, equipment, etc. out of the cave. Once the patient was out of the cave, though, after that 20 and a half hours, he was flown to a trauma center, underwent surgery, spent about a week in ICU and several weeks in a rehab hospital. But none of that having been possible had they not been able to successfully locate him and then perform that rescue. So back to our topic. What is our role in a cave search, and how can we work to help achieve this successful outcome? So first question, might seem obvious, but what do we search for? You know, obvious answer would be, well, of course, we search for the missing person, but it's actually not the case. We don't search for the missing person. We search for clues. And the reason I say that is a couple things. One, there's only one missing person or one missing group of persons, but there's thousands of clues. And we'll talk more about clues in just a moment. You know, it might seem like a bit of a distinction without a difference. I mean, after all, the missing person is just one really big clue, but when we search, we have a tendency to only find what we're actually searching for. So as we go through and look at some examples and talk about some examples of clues, think about if we were just searching for a person, how easily we might be able to miss these clues. And remember that ultimately the clues will lead us to the patient. So what is a clue? Generally, a clue is something or anything that doesn't belong, something that's out of place. You know, mentioned earlier, there's many more clues than there are subjects. You know, for instance, just walking a mile, you leave over 2,000 clues. And just every footstep, every footprint is a potential clue. Imagine if you're crawling through a cave, that's even more clues that you might be leaving. You know, a clue might be something as simple as a piece of trash that's left behind. It could be something a little more complex in terms of maybe it's a boot print in the mud. Again, if we're searching just for the person, how easy is it to miss just some scuffs in the mud? But taking the time to conduct a truly focused search, which we'll talk about more in a moment, we can find these relatively obscure clues. But we have to evaluate the clues at the same time. A boot print, a scuff mark in the mud along a common path may mean nothing. In all likelihood, it may be related to our victim. It may not be related to our patient. It may be related to the other people that have been traveling in and out of that cave on a routine basis. But when we have something that deviates from the norm, a path, a footprint, something like that, that is departing from that common path, that gives us intelligent information. That gives us something that we can work with. We have an area of mud that's completely undisturbed, and all of a sudden we have footprints going through that. We have handprints where someone crawled through it. That can be important to us. Maybe we see a rock that's been flipped over. All the other rocks are, rubbed clean from everyone crawling across that particular section, but now we see one that's a little bit muddier, a little bit wetter, a little bit drier, whatever the case might be. Those are the things that need to jump out at us, that we need to take the time to find those things that can help us lead us to that patient. So that said, how do we actually search for our clues? Few things that we might employ. So maybe it's a passive search, maybe it's an active search, and we'll talk more about both of those in just a moment. But what we really want to focus on is the various skills and techniques that we're going to employ in conducting this search exercise, this search operation. First off, I do want to mention, this is a very, very brief overview of a very broad topic. We're going to spend about 30 minutes or so tonight talking about cave search. If that's the extent of your cave search training, that's a shame. Spend more time focusing on these things. Take an NCRC training. Volunteer with your local wilderness search and rescue team. Whatever it might be, practice doing search. And we'll talk more about what that involves. But let's first start with our passive search techniques. So passive search techniques is exactly what it sounds like. It's a passive activity that produces search results. So the primary focus of passive search is to limit the amount of active search, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Primarily, we accomplish this by limiting the amount of area, by containing the zone, the space, the portion of the cave in which the patient might be located. So on an initial level, that may start with something as absolutely simple as entrance control. Not only does it maintain accountability of our searchers, of our responders, but also it helps ensure that the missing person doesn't leave the cave. Now, that's not to say if they try to leave the cave, you push them back in and say, we haven't found you yet. Of course not, that'd be ridiculous. But once they do, we've now been successful in our search with using just a very passive technique. So it's not unheard of for the missing person to exit the cave. For that matter, it's not unheard of for them to exit the cave and join the search party that unknowingly to them is actually looking for themselves. So taking the time to immediately set up that entrance control, making sure the person doesn't leave and get a ride home or something like that. Now we're searching a cave in which no one is located in because they're at the Starbucks down the street. Similar to entrance control, though, we want to limit the internal portion of the cave itself. Okay? Maybe we can do that with something called track traps. So you can imagine, as we saw in those photos earlier, a muddy section of the cave. Maybe we can go through and clean that up so that there are no old tracks there. And then that way, if the patient crosses through that area, their tracks are trapped in that area, and we all of a sudden have information. We have a clue that we can positively identify back to our patient because we know 3 hours ago there was no tracks there. We know none of the rescuers walked through there because they know they're not supposed to, but we now have tracks. So possibly our patient walked through that area. Maybe it's signs, maybe it's markers. Maybe it's a piece of flagging tape laid across the trail, which we'll talk about more later. But it's a sign, a signal to the lost person that we're here, we're looking for you. Stay right here. The thing with these sort of passive techniques is we have to take the time to go back and check them. If we have a sign put up that says we are looking for you, wait here for us, we'd better go back and check that spot because eventually that person's going to become tired of waiting and try to find their own way out. And again, at that point, what are they doing? Just becoming lost again. And the last one I want to talk about is our attractors. So something that's going to draw the patient out to them. Maybe that's a bright light set up in an area. Maybe that's sound. Maybe it's food, something that smells really good. Something that's going to pull the patient from wherever they are within the cave to this area. Again, making sure we leave a note to let them know, we're looking for you, wait here, and then being sure we go back and check them. Now, that said, when we go back and check those passive indicators, that is one portion of an active search. Okay? Active search is exactly what it sounds like. It is actively moving, actively working throughout that search operation to seek out and to find our missing person or our missing group, whatever it might be. Now, one aspect I do want to touch on briefly is the difference between looking versus searching. Okay? When I say looking, I'm talking about exactly what you think. The passive activity that we do every day, the same way we go about that we lead our lives, generally how we observe the world around us. Okay? But I want to ask you this, how frequently do we miss things? How many of you on your drive home from work today remember what cars you drove past? How many cars did you drive past? Were they red? Were they green? Were they blue? I'd be shocked if you know. I know I don't. The reason we don't know those things is because we were just looking at the cars around us. We were filtering out all of those things that didn't make any difference and letting them fade into the noise of the background. We can't do that with search. Search is not simply looking at the cave around us. It is an active technique where we are focused on observing the very details of the things around us. When we're driving home and searching, we don't just see the traffic. For that matter, we don't just see the cars. We don't see just the color of the cars. We see the car that has the dented fender on it, the scratched bumper, the one that's running a little bit rough. We pay attention to all of those details. When we're caving, we move through the cave. We see the rocks. We see the passage. We see the beautiful formations. When we're conducting cave search, though, we're actively observing all of those details. We don't see the rocks. We don't see the muddy passage. We see the shape of the rocks. We see the crystals that are in the rocks. We see the mud, whether it's smooth or it's folded over because someone placed their knee in that area, like we saw earlier. We focus on the details. We don't see the forest. For that matter, we don't even see the trees. We see the leaves and the structure of the leaves thereof. Again, we search for the details. If we get lost just looking at the rocks and the mud and the general color around us, we're going to miss what could be a potential clue. We look for things like shape that may be a little bit out of place. People are round. Some of us more round than others, but we are rounded. We have soft edges. Rocks generally don't. Now, cave formations certainly do have nice round edges, but the rocks don't. So maybe we end up seeing some formations that we've never seen before because we're focused on looking for those shapes, those things that are out of place. But again, we're focused on the details. Maybe we're looking for color. Mud, not that colorful. Again, cave formations may be very colorful. People tend to be very colorful. Some of our caving suits that we wear are incredibly colorful at times, but we're looking for those things that are out of place. We're only going to observe the clues if we are actively searching for and conducting a focused visual sweep of that. How easily could we have missed this face, this head in this photo if we weren't actively looking? And I realize on the screen it is hard to see, but seeing that subtle curve of the nose and things like that. But if we just look at the entire picture, we miss those details. If we take the time to focus and actively search throughout the photo, throughout the cave passage, we'll pick up on details that otherwise we might have missed, particularly if we are sweeping and looking for a person. We're easily going to miss those more subtle clues. So again, this is why we search for clues. Now, we do that, I think I've reinforced the point several times already, but within very active process. Obviously, right now, we're talking about using our visual senses, seeing. But that, again, is very active, a visual sweep of the area. Maybe it's looking left, sweeping our eyes slowly to the right, looking up, sweeping our eyes down, looking forward, looking backwards. You know, we tell all of our searchers, look forward, look backwards, look up, down, look all around. Because you never know at what angle the light may change, that your perspective might change, that otherwise you might be able to see a clue that from the other direction you could not. So it's, again, the active visual sweep. Now, one of the things we will talk more about later is exhaustion and fatigue. You'll notice that as you're conducting active search, it is an exhausting activity. Now, you may have traveled through this cave many times, but I promise none of us travel through it looking at every single detail like we need to on a cave search operation. So realizing that it is an active component and that it is going to be exhausting, we're going to need to take breaks to make sure we're conducting that good, solid visual sweep of our area as we're moving through it. But with caving, our search techniques are not limited only to visual. We have 5 senses that we've been given. Almost all of them can aid us in some way, shape, or form in cave search. Now, we use visual primarily because that's how we as humans tend to take in information from the world around us. That's our primary sense. You know? We know with dogs that's not necessarily true. Smell is one of their primary senses. You know, in wilderness search and urban search, canines are an incredibly useful search tool for us. I'm not even going to touch the argument of whether or not cave search dogs are useful or not, but I will argue that smell, while we may not use smell above ground, it gets lost in all the noise and our noses just aren't built to filter those other things out. Smell in a cave environment could be absolutely beneficial to us. You know, maybe the person has sat down and they've opened up some food or something like that. So taking a moment to stop and smell those things could be more successful. You know, not going to comment on the tracking pot smoke through the cave from Greg, but you know, anything that might be giving off a smell, taking that time again to actively search for those things and register them that they could potentially be a clue. Okay. Maybe that's feel. Now, I know this might sound ridiculous, but taking a moment to feel the rocks. Is there a rock that's more wet, more dry, etc.? You know, a clue is something that doesn't belong. If all of the rocks in an area are dry, but now all of a sudden I find that one that's wet, why is that one wet? You know, is the ceiling dripping just on that one spot? Maybe. Or did it get flipped over? Did someone sit there? Did they spill their water there? Something. Anything that may not belong, that may be out of place, is a potential clue. And all of those clues, as they're conglomerated together, can help lead us to that victim. And hearing, we'll talk about that one more in just a moment. And then our last sense, taste, that one may not be quite so helpful for us in a cave search. If you figure out how it is, I'm not sure I want to know, but let me know. So, active acoustic search. As we mentioned earlier, so sight is our primary way in which we take in information from the world around us. Auditory with our ears, that's probably the secondary way by which we obtain most of our information. Now, this may seem relatively obvious to us, but we have to call out. We have to make noise. We have to tell the person that we're actively looking for them if we want them to respond to us. We need to call out loudly, frequently. We need to use the person's name when we're calling out. Just think with me for an instant. You're in a crowded theater. Okay, it's probably been over a year since any of you have been there. But imagine pre-COVID, you're in a crowded space. How much easier is it to hear someone that calls out your name from the other side of the room? Your name jumps out amongst all that noise. You can hear that. Same thing if we use the patient's name as we're calling out. And then what might seem obvious, but once we call out, we have to stop and listen. Again, I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but you'd be surprised, especially as you get tired, how easy it is to call out for little Johnny who's missing, but then just to continue to chit-chat with the other people in your search squad, to continue digging through your bag looking for that snack because you're on a break. In fact, when you call out, shut off all your other senses. Stop moving, close your eyes, stand there, and listen. with those other senses shut off, you will actually hear better. So that's one of the things that I find that can help me stop and listen, is stop, close your eyes, call out, and listen for something, for a response. Now, we all know, we've all been in caves before. Caves can do some weird stuff with sound. Okay? Maybe we don't find them. Maybe we hear something. Maybe we don't. Maybe we hear something, but we don't know where it's from. A worst case scenario, if we're hearing them respond to us, at the very least, we've detected that they're in the general area. Now we can start narrowing our search area and actually work moving from detection into a location mode to help find them. Now, all that said, we search for clues. We actively look for them. We actively smell for them. We actively listen for them. But how do we actually conduct the search itself? How do we get these things organized? How do we actually start moving out and doing search? First off, search is absolutely an emergency. I'm sure it's been talked about before. I'm sure we're all familiar with. When something happens in a cave, if medical care is needed, rescue is needed, definitive care is daylight. Okay? We cannot rescue the person until we find them. So search is an emergency. We have to efficiently conduct that search in order to efficiently find the individual so that we can provide the care they need in order to be evacuated from that cave. Obviously, caves are a complex maze of interconnected passages throughout an entire three-dimensional space. Now, I think for anyone conducting wilderness search, initially, it's a little bit intimidating just looking at a topographic map and trying to understand what all those little brown lines mean. The topographic map has nothing on a cave map for any of us that have looked at cave maps before. Now we're dealing with a truly three-dimensional world where passages crisscross above and below each other. Okay? But taking the time to familiarize ourselves with these things, making sure that we understand what we've been assigned to do, or if we're management, making sure we understand what our research resources have been assigned to do. Again, the goal of this is to efficiently conduct this search in order that we can find that person and help get them rescued. So we're going to do that through a combination of navigation and passage marking. Let's talk first about navigation. So this is a cave map. I know on your screen it may be a little bit small, but cave maps, as we're all familiar, can be incredibly complex. You know, start overlaying on top of that all of the different components that may be involved with the search. Once we start segmenting the area so we can determine who's going to search in what particular zone. Again, that's slightly beyond the scope of this course or this discussion, but these are the type of things that, especially if you're getting into managing and leading a cave search effort, this is the information that is taught in some of those NCRC classes and other search classes. So I would encourage you again to work towards that. But navigation, one of the most useful tools in all of navigation is a map. Now, ideally, that's a physical map that every member of the team has, or at least every search team has with them. But maybe it's nothing more than a sketch map that someone drew up. You know, someone that's familiar with the cave, back of the napkin kind of sketch of roughly what the layout of the cave is. Either way, particularly if we're responsible for deploying the teams into the cave, we need to use a map in some way, shape, or form to tell people where to go, what to do, what your job is. You know, an assignment of go into the cave and look for people is not a search assignment. We need to assign them to a particular segment, a particular passageway, a particular area. Again, we need to work efficiently so we're not duplicating effort throughout the exercise. So combining our cave maps, our navigation, do we carry a compass so we can help navigate and make sure we're in the right portion of the cave? Okay. Another thing that can help us with this is passage marking. Okay. Partially, as we talked about earlier, this is a passive search technique. You know, we put a marker out and we tell the lost person, if you come across this marker, stay right here. We will be back in 2 hours to check and see if you're here. Potentially, this is an indication to other search squads of, don't worry about this passage right now. Search squad 1 already searched this particular passage. We did it at 2000 hours. Okay. Maybe it's something that someone that is familiar with the cave, they can go through the cave and start naming the different passages. So we can tie the actual cave back to our cave map, and we know where we've been assigned to go. Whether it be a piece of flagging tape or another idea I absolutely loved, I think it's from Anmar and Sarah passed it on to me, was poker chips. A set of numbered poker chips going down a passageway. That way it can indicate to follow-on search squads that another squad has already been here. Now, that's not to say you don't search that area also. We'll talk about that more later. But it's an indication of where you are, that someone else has been there. Again, helping to mark those passages in order that we can organize our search and conduct that in a much more efficient manner. So, to that point, how do we organize our search? As we've been discussing, we have to conduct an efficient search operation. If we're duplicating effort, if we're researching passages ad nauseum, we are now wasting effort that could be used to search passages that have not otherwise been searched. So we need to efficiently conduct our search. Now, again, we're not working haphazardly through the area. We're not just randomly assigning ourselves where we want to go. It's a coordinated effort between our searchers and our leaders. So let's first start with our searchers themselves, or the search task force leaders. Okay? As a searcher, my primary job, my role, is to employ those individual search techniques. It's to apply those techniques in the area, the passage, the zone, the segment, whatever it might be, in which I have been assigned to do my work. It's not my job to decide where I want to go work. It's my job to do what I was assigned to do. Now, when we are doing that, we cannot play follow the leader. This is not a caving trip, a caving party where we're all following the common path of travel. We need to fan out. We need to spread throughout that passage and actively search for those clues. Again, looking for those clues that deviate from the common path, those things that don't belong. And most of all, we cannot make an assumption of where the patient is and or where they might not be. Oh, well, surely they didn't go that way, or there's no way they would have fit down that passage. People can do some amazing things when they're in a panic mode. They can start squeezing through and going places they never would have gone before just because I'm panicked and maybe that's the way out. So don't assume. Take the time to check. Now, if you're not finding any clues or any indication that someone went that way, maybe it gets a little bit lower priority, but take the time to check. Ultimately, our job as searchers in the field, as searchers in the cave, is to be that intelligence gathering resource for search management. We're the eyes and ears for the search operation. The guys above ground don't know what's going on underground. That's our job. We have to report not only what we found, but also what we didn't find. We have to report what we searched and where we didn't search. The searchers are a critical piece of that puzzle, but ultimately, it does involve other components, specifically in our case, search management. So if you're in a position in which you might be called to manage a cave search, hopefully this is not the only training you're receiving. But even more importantly, that operation does not start when you get the notification. Before that notification occurs, hopefully you have some sort of cave search pre-plan in place. Do you know what resources are available in your local area? Maybe it's the fire department. Have they been trained to work in caves? Maybe it's local cavers. Have they been trained to interface with the authority having jurisdiction? Hopefully it's both. That's frankly the whole beauty of NCRC, is it brings those two groups together so that they are working, and it doesn't matter whose agency or whose caver anymore. We're a group of resources with common skills so that we can work together to conduct that search. Maybe it's cavers from out of town. Cave searches, cave operations, cave rescues can take many hours, if not days. So we might have time to get people from out of town into the area to assist with this. But once we arrive on scene, first priority, and this might sound obvious, but it's easily missed, is get resources underground. Again, that's not to say to just pump people into the cave without a plan, but come up with an initial plan immediately and get those resources moving. You can always have them come back and check and provide some intelligence, let you know what they're finding or not, but you cannot talk a person out of a cave. You have to get in the cave. You have to go actively search for them. You have to find them and help bring them out. Now, one of the tools that we as search managers use to accomplish this is commonly called reflex tasking, or you may hear of it from the bicycle wheel model. I won't take the time to go into too much detail, but if you think of a simple bicycle wheel, the hub of the wheel, that's where the person is most likely to be located. So if we know what their destination in the cave was, where everyone goes when they go to visit this cave, that would be our hub. That's where they're most likely to be. Send a resource to the hub. Go check that area first. The spokes, those are your common paths of travel. That's the route that everyone takes to go back to that formation. That's the side passage that everyone takes to go see the waterfall. Those are your common paths. Send resources to check those. Reflectors, those are some of your other attractors. Those are things that draw people to the cave. The big drop, the waterfall, the beautiful formation, whatever it might be. Again, go check those things. And finally, the outer rim of our bicycle wheel. That's the outer extent of the cave. That's our containment. That's where we make sure the person doesn't leave. Because after with this initial reflex tasking, we're going to have to start sending search squads in to check everything else, to check that area between the spokes, to check those less commonly traveled passages. But again, get the resources underground, get them working, and have them help you to gather that intelligence that you need to actually prosecute the search and find that person. Now, I mentioned earlier with our passage marking that we may mark an area so that we don't have someone else follow on and do redundant search. Now, I do want to clarify that real quick. That is not to say in any way, shape, or form, I want to be very clear about that, that we only search a segment once, that we only search a passage one time. That is absolutely not the case. I'll be the first to tell you, it's one of my hot button topics when someone comes back and says, I cleared that passage. They're not there. I cleared it. Clear means you cleared it. They're not there. You know, again, my urban search and rescue world, when someone comes back to me and says, I cleared this section of the rubble pile, my question to them is, you sure? Did you really? You're telling me it's so clear I can take a bulldozer through this and bulldoze that area down? You're that positive? We're never that positive that someone's not in that area. Our job is not to clear it and make sure that the person's absolutely not there. It's to work down that level of coverage, to be relatively positive that no one's there. Let me share an analogy with you real quick. We've all lost our car keys before, right? So we lose our car keys, what do? We think of all the places that the car keys might be. Okay? Maybe they're in the pockets on my pants that I was wearing yesterday. Maybe they're in the couch cushions. Maybe they're on my dresser where I always leave them. Maybe for some reason they're in the freezer. I don't know. But we think of all the different places the car keys might be located. And then what do? I start a systematic search, starting at the areas where the keys are most likely to be located and moving through my entire search. Now, when I initially check the couch, I probably just stick my hands down between the cushions. I see if they're there. If they're not there, I move on, I check the dresser. They're still not there. Maybe now I come back and I flip the couch cushions upside down and I check in a little more detail. Again, the point of this is not that we are only searching an area one time, but we're searching it efficiently. We're checking those couch cushions once, and then we're moving on and checking somewhere else. But eventually we're coming back and maybe we are turning the house upside down like this and flipping up every drawer and dumping everything out and flipping over the couch cushions to make sure that it's not there. Again, we don't clear areas. We successfully and sequentially work through those areas, continually building up our level of coverage until we have a high degree of confidence that had the person been there, we would have located them. Because ultimately, the goal is to work in such a way that we do find them. So, in summary, key points. What are we searching for? Remember, we're not looking for the victim. Or the patient. We are looking for clues. Our clues will lead us to the patient, which after all is just a very big clue. And it's the clue that once you find that clue, quit looking for other clues. But clues will lead you to the patient. When we conduct that search, we are very actively conducting that search. It's an active process that we are visually taking in all of the details, that we're seeing the leaves, not the forest, not the trees, but we're actively searching for each one of those details. Okay? And we're making sure that we organize that search, whether it be as individual searchers doing the job in which we've been assigned to do, or whether it be as search managers, making sure we get our resources under the ground and moving through that area in an efficient manner, because remember, search is absolutely an emergency. Oh, and one last thing, back to our Ellison's Cave rescue from May of 2013, that's our patient. 4 months after that accident, he was able to recover to the degree that he was able to walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding. That would not have been possible if it had not been for the dedication of people like each one of you that are actively participating in training and preparation to conduct search and rescue. But if we want to see these successful outcomes, the most important thing we have to remember through all of this is that we maintain a positive mental attitude. If you take nothing else from this presentation, if you would, take this one statement with you. If you will remember and always believe in your heart of hearts when you are working a search that the subject is in my assigned segment and I will find them, you will be successful. If you get discouraged, if you get down, if you get tired and exhausted, and you lose this positive mental attitude, if you lose that faith, I don't care if they're in your segment, you won't find them. But if we maintain that good positive attitude, the subject is in my assigned segment and I will find them, then we'll be responsible for helping bring that successful conclusion that was achieved in that same Ellison's rescue. So, thank you all for your time tonight. Any questions?
Great job, Casey.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
If you have questions,
Sarah,
you
thank
can
you for posting
unmute.
that search or that rescue.
If you have questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type them into the chat. I know that I'm motivated to more systematically search for the TV remote when I can't find it, like this morning. And I think keeping that positive mental attitude is very important. Sometimes it's hard when it's early in the morning.
Yes.
Casey, I actually had a quick question. So I know there's a lot of resources for tracking above ground and some of the tools and tips that you use for that. Are you aware of any that are specific to below ground or like recommendation? I mean, you showed us a lot of examples, but is there anything kind of more formal on that?
Nothing that I'm aware of. Certainly, if anyone else on the call is aware of such, I'd love to hear it. One of the interesting things about tracking above ground is, as you mentioned, there are a lot of studies about how tracks age above ground and degrade over time, be it from sun, wind, etc. Caves are pretty unique in that one cave may or may not act like another. So we may not have that same level, well, we won't have that same level of degradation that we do in above ground. You know, in fact, I might have one cave where there is kind of a windy passage and maybe those tracks do degrade, but others, they may not as much. So unfortunately, no, Sarah, I don't know of any specific resources on that. Yes, Alan.
Casey, well done. You got it all right. Excellent. Is you mentioned like smell, is we had an actual cave search where we used sense of smell twice. Is the 4 guys that were lost in the cave also had a small dog with them. Our first smell clue was we found a pile of fresh dog poop, and that put us on the right track. And then we smelled, yeah, it was a significant clue. And then we got a little further along in the cave. And the fun thing was we were working without a map. So we get another smell. We couldn't figure out what it was, but it was different. And it led us, you know, through some turns and twists and ups and downs, and led us to the lost people. And what they were doing, they had gotten cold and they were burning their underwear to stay warm. So it was burning mighty whiteys that led us to them. So smell does work. One of the other things that I've noticed in dealing with above ground search managers is the concept in cave search of not on the map comes up, because there's some famous searches of people lost in passages that were not on the map. Above ground, the topo map is 100%, but in a cave map, NOM is another possibility.
Excellent point.
So well done. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. Thank you.
We have a question. What are your usual operational periods on a search of an intricate cave?
I'm going to invite others to jump in on this as well, but I hate giving you the it depends answer, but I think it depends. Unfortunately, or I guess the part I would add to that is it's probably a lot longer than you think it is and longer than you want to be comfortable with. I know it's very tempting, and I've seen way too many people do it, of report back in 30 minutes, report back in an hour. I mean, for that matter, report back in 2 hours. Most of our caves are one way in, one way out sort of items. So you lose an incredible amount of efficiency. Now, that does reinforce the priority of, while your search squad needs to be one of the first groups into the cave, comms needs to be chasing them as quickly as possible, so you can get that communication back out without having to retrace all those steps. So, again, I hate giving you the it depends answer, but I would say it is many, many hours. It's long enough that you're starting to wonder and worry and things like that. But if you've got good people that you trust and you know that they're capable of being underground for 6-8 hours at a time, and they're working and moving efficiently, keep them working. If they're always spending their time just yo-yoing in and out of that cave, that's time that you're not working efficiently, that you're not conducting search. So I would say be brave. Feel free to send people in on several hours long type searches. And again, try to get communications in as quickly as possible so you can talk with those teams and have them report back, at the speed of sound instead of having to crawl their way back out. So, and again, if someone else would like to jump in there, please feel free.
That's a great answer, Casey. I think we're going to cut it off here for time. So thanks again, Casey, for that excellent presentation.